In this video, we're going to talk about getting started in people analytics. If you don't really know where to start, this is the video for you. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, the host of HR Shop Talk. On the show, you get expert insight into HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my smart guests. Today, my guest is Allen Hornung. Allen is a director of people strategy, insight, and experience. I learned a lot from him when we had our last discussion. And from that, I can tell he's both technically strong and has a real sense of organizations and what to do when. I look forward to learning more. Hi, Allen. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a very general question, and I'll get you to take a stab at it, recognizing that not all of us are at the same place. But from your sense, where are most HR professionals at with respect to people analytics?
Yeah, I could answer that two ways. Where are most HR professionals at probably depends on where you sit within the function.
Okay.
And so I think there's been a broad move to have some expectation for baseline analytics expertise, or at least awareness, in roles like HR business partners or generalists, whereas years ago that maybe wasn't the case.
Yeah.
But I could also answer it in terms of where most HR functions or departments are at.
Okay.
I think I've seen a lot of movement there in the past 5 to 10 years. Probably correlates most with size. I think a lot of the bigger enterprises, most now probably have dedicated people analytics functions, whereas smaller sized companies are probably having like a person or a very small team that encompasses analytics, reporting, data, systems, maybe a couple other things together. So I think from an individual standpoint, I have seen more and more people showing an interest and trying to understand how to consume data and insights, how to use that to support their clients in the business. But I've also seen a lot more structured, dedicated departments pop up in the last 5 years.
Right. You talked about business partners and a pretty common role. So what should, and I'm already getting off topic, but what should a business partner know about people analytics?
I think they need to know what it can do and what it can't. So kind of the limitations, but also where bringing together even basic data could produce kind of an aha moment for their clients. And so depending on, business partners are great at translating the strategy of their clients and the businesses they support into kind of those workforce and talent elements. And so knowing how data can inform those discussions, maybe that's kind of the language of the business leaders they're supporting, is more just like objective measures and metrics, which this would be that for HR, or just bringing together new ideas and suggestions from a data perspective to say, you've said you want to capture talent X or this type of skill or this quantity of hot skill. Here's the data on that. Here's how we've performed in the past. Here's how long it takes to get these people in the door and for them to develop the right skills. Here's what a buy strategy would look like. That's all encompassed within people analytics. And so as a business partner, you don't need to necessarily crunch those numbers yourselves or even know where to source them, but you need to know that they can add value in some of your conversations and where to go to get help.
Now, getting back on track though, we're talking about getting started with people analytics. So if you're in an organization with very little in terms of people analytics, what are the steps? And they may be iterative where you go back and start over and just get better, but can you talk through briefly what those steps are?
Sure. Yeah. I think they are iterative and probably non-linear. So I'll kind of, the order of operations probably varies by company, but I think you probably need to start with a person, a leader, and they could be a leader practitioner or like, a doer much of the time, but you need somebody to be empowered to actually focus on this as like a full-time job.
Right.
Getting people to do a little bit of this off the side of their desks. You can work on little analyses, but you give up so much in the way of governance and prioritization and just really moving the function forward. So I think you need to appoint somebody and make it their job, even if it's part-time. They're just doing the work themselves. You can supplement that with people on maybe a matrixed or less dedicated basis, but you need somebody to make this a priority. You need data, you need clean data, or if that doesn't exist, you need a person or a tool that can help um, transform and cleanse and export the data you need to do the analysis. And I think the other thing is a good governance structure. You need support at the top of the HR leadership team, and you need a conduit to talk to somebody or some sort of committee that can help steer the analytics work to the highest business value applications at the moment. And so if you've got the team and you've got the data, you've got the tools, but you don't know what to work on, and you're just working on projects that are interesting or kind of quick wins, you're probably giving something up in terms of that longer term strategic view and really helping move the business forward, which you need a more senior vantage point to kind of steer those resources.
We're all limited in our budget. Like, we just don't have money to go out and hire someone who's going to do people analytics on top of everything we're already doing. So where does the money to fund that position come from?
I think you need to be creative with your business case and show how it can actually be self-funding.
Okay.
And so a lot of the work People Analytics does is quantified in dollars and cents. Predicting and mitigating turnover being like a classic example.
Okay.
And so you could do a cost benefit analysis to say, if we invest in this type of analysis or a team to do this type of work, it's going to cost X. But if we can reduce turnover by 2% next year, it's actually going to save Y. And so we're actually going to save money for the company by investing a little bit more within this team in HR.
And then moving on to this cleaning the data, and I know we talked a bit about this in the last episode. To what degree is data a mess in your average company? And I know this is another great generalization.
I could speak to my own experience,
Okay.
But your question is more on average. I think it's probably in an okay spot, but probably still is, I don't know, call it like half the time of an analytics project might be spent on sourcing and modeling and cleaning the data. And so it's kind of an efficiency thing. If you've got the resources, you've got the team ready to do the work, do you want them to spend their time just massaging the data, or do you want to spend it on the analytics and the insights and communication out to stakeholders? So I think that speaks to the importance of having clean data. Some companies have a variety of HR systems between applicant tracking and performance and compensation, payroll, just core HCM. And so that could easily eat up a lot of your small analytics team's time, is just bringing together data, which leaves very little time left over to actually do the analytics work. So if possible, investing in those processes or tools up front just really helps accelerate the effort.
You know, you talk about tools and processes that will improve the quality of your data. Can you sort of describe or name some?
I mean, converging around some of the big enterprise systems that, SuccessFactors, Workday, there's, Oracle Cloud, there's options out there, SAP, that certainly benefit from having everything in a single source. But there's other ways to do it too. So if you're kind of in a best of breed model, there's tools you can buy or layer on that basically will model all your data and stage it in a single platform where you can just query your report off of that. So you're not actually going to 6 different systems. That's all set up. You just go to the data lake or again, like the platform that would allow you to get the data you need to start to hit the ground running.
Then you talked about governance, and you talked briefly about what needs to be in place from, in terms of senior support. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think you need a direct line into the CHRO or to another very senior HR leader that can act as kind of that sounding board, steering committee, making sure the team is, especially if it's a small team, always focused on the most important business problems of the day, not just HR problems, but business problems. And so I think without that, there's a risk of being a bit insular and working on things that either the data is readily available or a local leader's pet project, things like that. And so having that governance model just always reinforces getting the most return on your limited investment in analytics, directing those people to the biggest business problems the company's facing.
Okay, so who decides, in this governance model, who decides what the biggest business problem is. I mean, to, like you say, like to that operations leader, their problem is really pressing,
Everybody's problem is the most important
right?
at the moment.
Right.
Depending on your size and capacity, I think you can set up a prioritization matrix, have sort of objective criteria,
Okay.
and say, we'll agree that these are the factors we'll consider when we're taking on new work, and that can kind of help with your intake. But
Okay.
if that extra overhead is too much, or you're just working in a really small agile area, I think it's a constant discussion between CHRO or senior HR leadership and the people analytics leader to kind of say, with limited cycles available, what are we going to work on next month, next quarter? And it's just kind of that informal line of communication is constantly open.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me an example of some work you would probably turn down, and some work that you think is a really good role for people analytics?
One of the rules of thumb is thinking ahead about how actionable something could be.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to commission some work and you can kind of foresee, regardless of the answer, the insights or the outcome, whatever the data says, there's no ability or desire to action on that,
Mm-hmm.
that's usually a candidate to walk away from that type of
Right.
project.
Yeah.
Because typically it's tough to prove that there's value if there's no action or interventions coming as a result. So if something's not actionable, it's probably not worth doing in the first place.
If you found this informative, subscribe to see all the episodes and comment. Have you gotten started with people analytics? How did you start? Let us know in the comment section. So we touched on this question when we were talking about governance, but maybe I'll get you to elaborate a little more. What team and organizational structure is conducive to good people analytics?
Yeah, what I will say, especially important when you're just starting out,
Okay.
is separating out the folks who do the operational reporting versus the analytics, because operational work will always take priority. It'll always crowd out some of the more longer term strategic
Yes.
work that doesn't have that same immediate payoff. So
Yes.
what we found worked really well is actually putting a box around the operational requests and the analytics requests, so that the operational doesn't kind of overwhelm the full team.
Right. How do you do all those people, both the operational and the people analytics, report to you? And how do you make sure that the people analytics people just work on people analytics and it doesn't kind of, start working as a team on all those operational requests?
Yeah, they do. We're, for us, that's worked very well. Having them all report to the same leader. The way we've managed it is basically having the capacity. We've staffed the reporting side with what we thought was reasonable.
Okay.
And that's the box, that's the limiter. Any extra work that comes in has to be delayed, or we have to reprioritize, but keeping the workload matched to the resource count on the reporting side, which ensures the dedicated analytics resources can focus 100% of their time on true analytics work.
Can you articulate again, like, what's the difference between that operational report and the analytics, and maybe take an example from recruitment or something?
Yeah. So as I define it, operational reporting would be taking data, facts, out of a system and putting that into a format where whoever the requester is can use that data. Sometimes it's individual, sometimes it's aggregate. That would be reporting, though. There's a right answer. There's one answer, and it's the facts out of the system. Analytics is much more vague and nebulous, and it's kind of understanding the problem, a bit of that consulting mindset, and using data and science to actually help solve those problems. So taking the outputs of the reporting as the input into the analytical process, but also understanding if there's other data or gaps you need to flesh out, layering on your professional judgment and expertise and a healthy dose of creativity. That's more the analytics piece, where there's no one right or wrong answer. It can be interpreted differently by different people. Whereas reporting, there is a right answer, and it's, did you get these facts out of the system quickly, efficiently, accurately?
Okay. Because, I look in reporting, you'll produce a report, it has the facts, and then they want you to do a whole bunch of analysis on it, cut it, dice it this way, dice it that way, as they go looking for deeper meaning out of that report.
Yep.
Where does that fall?
That's a great question. I would almost put that and describe it as like dashboards or BI as kind of an in-between, because slicing and dicing data there's still only one right answer. And so it may not require all those ingredients to successful analytics that I mentioned a minute ago, but it's more than just pulling facts out of a system. And so BI and dashboards is definitely a part of the job. It's probably up to each company to decide where that falls on the line between reporting or analytics, or if it's kind of a collaborative effort. But there's value in that. People still want and expect that.
Yeah.
I would argue, though, true analytics is more than that, because you need to build those tools to help answer some of the low-hanging fruit questions. How many people did we lose or did we hire in this region in last quarter? But analytics is about a lot more than that, and really kind of those unstructured business problems that you're trying to solve.
So someone who's getting started with this, how much familiarity with data and reporting is required?
I think it sure helps to understand your company's job hierarchy and internal like workforce data model, and how certain jobs and attributes fit together. But that can be learned. I think the bigger prerequisite is the mindset, and just that intellectual curiosity, that ability to kind of consult and be a business person first and an HR professional second, and being able to speak the language of numbers, and how you can use data and modeling applied to the workforce data, but to solve those business problems. So I think for the most part, the hard skills can be taught or learned. I think if you're hiring for this type of role, especially the leader role, it's more about the mindset and the ability to drive forward action and insights in a very unstructured way.
You already talked about when you're going to dig into a problem and when you're going to take a pass. And you talked about that matrix. And I meant to ask you about this when you were talking about it. Do you actually have a matrix? And what is in that, what are the axes of that matrix made up of?
We do for various parts of the teams I help oversee. You would gauge things like what's the effort, what's the organizational impact, and that could be in terms of dollars, that could be in terms of employees impacted. What's the degree of change required? How important is this to our clients versus this just coming up through HR as kind of self-improvement? Off the top of my head, there's probably 4 or 5 factors that we've considered, and it's always a challenge of interpretation about how you'd score those things. But in some cases that can be really helpful in prioritizing work and turning people away and saying, well, we did the objective review, and unfortunately this is going to have to be deferred.
Yeah, you also talked about the likelihood of action, right?
That's a key one. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. So what's the most common barrier you encounter in doing people analytics, and how do you handle it?
As of right now, and I would say this isn't everybody, but I feel like we're in a pretty good spot in terms of our data, in terms of our systems. We've got great people, great talent. One of our biggest problems today, or barriers, is around privacy risk. We could lose a lot of credibility with our people at large if they perceive this being used against them or as kind of like a breach of privacy. We always keep that front and center, and understanding how we can benefit both the company and employees, whether it's work-life balance, whether it's their engagement, their well-being. We want it to be win-win. And so I think one of the barriers is those bars are raising continuously. People expect more from their companies, and we just have to keep pace with those expectations.
You talked about privacy. Can you give an example of when the work you do would be viewed negatively by employees?
It's fraught with risk. We deal with the most sensitive data all day, every day. And whether that's performance ratings, succession plans, compensation, and long-term incentives.
EDI.
Exactly. Leaves, disability, like all of it.
Right.
So anytime we're doing work, we have certain principles in mind, like, can we use aggregate data instead of individual? Can we de-identify and anonymize everything? Can even storage, sharing, destruction of data after we're done the work, like those are all policies that we take pretty seriously, because we have to. Because if even one bad misstep can erode credibility for this function for years to come. Right.
Okay. Final question here. If you had one piece of advice to give to someone who's starting out with their people analytics, what would you suggest?
kind of the the old saying, like start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Everybody's has to start somewhere, and it
Mhm.
kind of seems daunting, I think, if you're thinking about
Yeah.
building a practice, and if you're reading
Yeah.
about like the Facebooks or the Googles and their people analytics practices, Microsoft, and they're just,
Yeah.
the stuff they're doing is just so mind blowing, and you're like, well, I'll
Yes.
never get there. But you have to start somewhere. And like I said, start with one dedicated person working
Yeah.
on this, and you
Yeah.
can build up from there. And you can do a lot without having a massive army of data scientists at your disposal. You can do a lot
Mhm.
if you're focused on the right problems and have that kind of business mindset first, and thinking about how we can use data and analytics to inform business problems.
Well, thanks, Alan. That was great. That piece about governance made me think quite a bit. Here is a link to the episode Alan and I did in the fall. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.